just having skimmed through the slides, Carsten, I think it would be great if when you come to queries, you could say a word or two why we really want to support them.
Yeah, that's pretty much the question.
Okay, it looks like we're going to be a small group today, but I think we can start. So welcome to this interim meeting of the core working group. I am Marco Tiloca. My co-chairs are Jaime Jimenez and Carsten Bormann. And this is an official IETF meeting, so the not well applies. We've been recorded. Take care of the not well. It's not just about IPR, also and especially about code of conduct. So be professional and nice to each other. And the plan for today was to discuss about two documents, problem details in last call with a few comments that came back already from AAD and OpsDir, I think, and href with a few points, especially about query very much related to recent discussions in CBOR already. Any agenda bashing to propose or any more topics to add for today? I think we'll have time. Okay, if no, then we can get into the single slide set for today from Carsten.
Yeah, I think you have to, exactly.
At least, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the agenda today, and I'm sure we are not going to use 90 minutes for that, but I think it's still good to get a little bit of synchronization on some of the issues here. So let's start with problem details, and that has dominated things a little bit in the last couple of weeks. We had an AD review. There is a branch for this AD review which is merged with a couple of editorial items. So it's always good to look at these branches. There are a number of questions remaining that we still need to address. And one question is, what does it actually mean to have a problem title that is not varying across instances? And so in 7807, this had a pretty well-defined meaning because the title was just the description of the problem type. So this concept of being stable across instances was essentially copied from 7807. That concept made sense when the title was basically a human readable version of the problem type. But we decided to get rid of the problem type for many reasons, because maybe that is actually one of the learnings that we can take from 7807. So maybe we should simply get rid of that second sentence, or maybe we should actually say what that second sentence is really trying to say, which is that this is a description of the kind of problem and not a description of the specific problem. So you wouldn't say that you have 54 euros on your account but you would say the generic problem, which is that you don't have enough money on your account to actually perform this particular transaction. And then there are other problem details that would tell you how much that transaction actually needs. Yeah, the other question is problem title actually a meaningful thing in our context? So should we look for something more radical and try to get rid of it? Yeah, I'd love to hear comments on that.
Hi, Carsten. It's optional, isn't it? So I mean,
Yes.
It's already something that you can dispose of. And the second comment I have is, I think adding the should not try to summarize the information is a bit, it goes too much into trying to tell what people need to do with this. I wouldn't. Also, summarize is a bit ambiguous to me. Is not something, not a term that I would know exactly what it means, because it must summarize the kind of information that you get in the details, but the way it summarizes, is a thing that is open to debate. So I really like to avoid the should not try, because it doesn't clarify to me what to do if I read it as as an implementer or as a user of this stuff. So I would just go with a short human readable summary of the problem shape, which seems definitely good guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, we still could add something like second half sentence to the short human readable summary of the problem shape, something like without describing the problem in detail, or something like that, or describing the specific instance of the problem in detail.
Right. Yeah. You're trying you shouldn't try to duplicate information that is detailed somewhere else, right? So that's the thing. That there is details to do exactly that, and so you really need to understand that if you want to provide the details, you have to use another field. It's not this one that you should use. And probably, yes, you just get rid of the thing, and because details is enough, right? Isn't it? So who cares about giving us a summary, an in-band summary? I don't know. I wouldn't go as radical as saying, let's drop this as a field. But
isn't
yeah, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
But isn't that exactly what shouldn't duplicate information available somewhere else would do, because the information is already in in the shape that is here. So if we were to say don't duplicate, then that's essentially don't use it, because the information should be there already somewhere else.
Right.
But it is already somewhere else. Right? So the details are already encoded some in under another key. So I don't understand what you're trying to say. Sorry.
I'm saying that if it shouldn't duplicate anything that's anywhere else already, that includes like the whole summary. So there shouldn't be a summary, because what it says in there is already in the problem type, or we don't have a type, but in the other fields. So the shape is already there. Explaining the shape would be duplicating information that is there already.
Yeah, but then it's human readable, so it's not. It's maybe duplicating information, but it's presenting that information in a different way.
Yeah. So when you scroll a log, right, and you want to have these kind of things, you know, to have things that your eyes can quickly grasp the information,
Yes.
and then you go into the details, right? You explore the thing, and you try and see what. Yeah, and then in the details you may have, you know, gigantic pieces of information, including a stack frame or whatever. I don't know, but so it seems useful to me as a thing to have. I wouldn't drop this, you know, because there's you know. There are exactly what Carsten said. There are human eyes on the other side of this. If you're dealing with a log pipeline, and that is good information for them.
Well,
Fine. Sorry.
go ahead, Christian.
It's fine with me to have it around. I'm just arguing against saying not to duplicate, because that could be read as not duplicate anything that's kind of already in the structure.
Yeah, I just took this note, adding to the first sentence, without duplicating instance-specific details contained in the other problem detail entries. And yeah, so this is again using this wobbly term instance, but I think most people will understand that.
But I mean, short and human readable are, you know, really the key characteristics of this thing, and you know, that's enough. Why should we go into, you know, further detail? Did those two words explain, to me at least, perfectly well what is the,
because you know all the context here, but somebody who's new to this will think, of course I have to include the amount of money on the account in the title.
Can we provide that example? Say, avoid doing this, right?
The example is actually in the last item on the slide.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could include that, yes.
Do that instead of introducing normative language.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, the example can only illustrate something that is explained as a concept. So I think we do need this without duplicating, but I think we're going into wordsmithing now. I think I get a gist of what we are trying to achieve here. Not constraining too much, but still explaining the idea of having this field in the first place.
Yeah. Okay.
Good.
Good.
Sorry, on the first part of the slide, you mentioned at some point you were considering to delete the second sentence, which should not. Did I get it right? Like, it should not change from occurrence to occurrence.
Yeah, that's the sentence that nobody understands.
Okay. You already have an example that you can take as a baseline example. Perhaps it helps to add a second one of the same problem shape, where, well, you change the title and you have a reason for it. And after all, someone will probably ask later on, what's a possible exception to do that anyway, in spite of the should not.
Okay, so we could add to this example the case that the account is blocked for some reason as a different problem shape.
Yeah, otherwise it becomes about defining what shape means, and you just move the problem one step back.
Yeah.
But if you give an example, that would work, I think. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so 22. Title and detail are the two human readable text strings we define, and we currently provide both for an unadorned CBOR text string or a language tagged text string. And Francesca's question was, why do we include the unadorned case? Because that rarely will make sense. So if it's human readable, how do you actually present it to a human if you don't have the information that you need to present it? So there are several ways to handle this. One would be making English an English language tag the default. The second one would be to make the default depend on the context. So we just say the language tag is unspecified and has to be taken from some context, but that's of course even less useful in the IoT space than it would be in the big web. Or we could say we simply don't allow unadorned text, so you have to provide the language tag. That would be radical, but it also would be consistent. And I think that this is an example of a design decision we will have to take a lot in further protocols. So I think we should get this right here and use this as a precedent for other cases where we have human readable text and actually mean end user human readable and not developer human readable.
Sure.
Yeah, none of these. Go ahead.
No, I think that was echo from Thomas's side.
Okay. None of these things are obvious choices. So I think this is maybe a bit of a bike shed problem, but it's actually a pretty important bike shed.
We still don't have anything like language negotiation around in co-op, right? Because so far everything was like text aimed at developers, and now we start having this human kind of end user readable text, right?
Right. So that makes item 2 less desirable because we don't have a standard way of establishing that context.
We might also take it as an item to look into the problem of establishing a context if we find neither 1 nor 3 acceptable.
So does anybody have a coin?
So option 3 means unavoidable overhead to some extent, right?
Yes.
So maybe that's a leverage to try option 1.
One has this cultural bias built in, which is, it's a good optimization, and I think it's, practically speaking, is the perfect choice now. But would that stand the what about the future?
Well, if we don't want to say, if we don't want to encode that bias ourselves, we can still go for option 2. Observe that no way of setting such a context is currently available, and leave it up, and basically leave it up to whatever is later defined to set a context to also set the same default, because that way of indicating context may or may not be actually used by the device. So, like, assume we specify later that a resource has some kind of default language, or a host has some kind of a default language. If that's not set, it's probably falling back to 1, but it will then not be, air quote, us saying that this is the default.
So does that mean go for 1 if you have no idea of the context?
Kind of, although it would really be up to whatever specifies how that context looks like later.
So it's probably something to phrase like in the absence of context, etc.
Okay.
Just a question. In terms of overhead, what are we talking about here? So this, I mean, going 3, what does it mean? Like, should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
5
6
bytes per string, if I
6
count
bytes.
correctly.
Yeah, something. 6
7.
bytes. 7.
Well, the false is optional, so
Yeah, false is optional. So 2 for the tag, array of 2, n
6.
2 plus text 6. Yeah, 6. Which, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, is it's not too much, right? But still.
So the most workable thing I've heard so far is going for context, and in the absence of context, use the 38 enfoo value.
Makes sense.
I didn't understand what you mean, but kind of, would that be 2 then 1 or 2 then 3?
Then 1.
2 then 1. Yeah, the 2 then 3 essentially means that you have to have context to derive this from, and if you don't, then you have to have a language tag, which is also probably workable. But it's one of these RFC 6919 things where we say must, but we know that you won't do that.
Two then 1 works for me. I don't know what other
Okay.
people think.
Good. We still can get feedback for that from the ADs. And of course, there's also an internationalization directorate, which might have an opinion on this. Good. So let's go to the next one. Why is this not working? Oh, okay. So this is just a quick notice of a won't fix. So Francesca said she would prefer more examples in section 3.1, in the section that introduces standard problem details entries. But on the other hand, we have defined standard problem details entries, so it's probably not necessary to include another example. And it might also be detrimental to put in an example, because people start using numbers taken from an example and think the example is something they can just copy without registering things and so on. So an example has some cost, has some downside. So I think it's okay to do a won't fix here. So if nobody disagrees with that, then there is the PR 27. So Joel, in his ops directorate review, noticed that we only address the meaning of ignore unknown for a consumer, in the sense of somebody consumes this and then there's nothing left. But what if that consumer actually stores the entry or forwards the entry? So what's our take on this? And it seemed to me that the best way to handle ignore unknown is to add a should, recommended, to retain the unknown entries in the stored or forwarded copy of the problem details, except when that would be unbearably difficult, because, for instance, we are using a different format. Or the role of the forwarder also is to filter out information that should not be disclosed. And if you have information there where you don't know what that is, you cannot really forward this from a filtering forwarder. So these would be the two exceptions that would be in the document. Yeah, there probably can be other exceptions, but I think the recommendation to retain this information, if there isn't a specific reason against that, I think that should stand.
I like this from the point of view of later doing the choral conversion.
Looks good.
Okay. So let's quickly look at the status. We don't have a telechat date yet. The next telechat is the 16th. I don't know if we actually can make that. But the reviews that the ADs would want to look at, those have already been initiated. We already had one review, which is the Obster review. We probably will have 3 other reviews, or at least 3 other reviews are being requested. So these should be processed before the telechat, the ISG telechat probably. And then, of course, the ballot positions of the ADs, those have to be processed as well. So getting this approved in June is still very much possible, but it also requires that everything works as planned.
Carsten, I had understood, obviously wrongly, but that the internationalization director review had already come through, but no.
No, I think
John's email. What was that?
that was direct email
Okay.
to some individuals and not the formal.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah, and we might still see some surprise there, but the informal communication, the hallway communication, was that this is a difficult and complex subject, but the internationalization director will not take this document as the example document in which all this needs to be once and for all fixed. And at least we have done our homework by providing language tag and direction information. So yeah, we will be surprised, but hopefully in a positive way. Okay, so that was that. And now we come to one of our favorite subjects, which are queries and CRIs. We have had significant change in the CBOR Pact environment. Up to now, we only had ways to share items and to build items out of concatenation. And it's difficult to do concatenation when a query interpretation would actually need to reach into a CRI and maybe add something to a nested array and so on. Of course, all that can be defined for a function tag. So we suddenly have the freedom to do the things that we want to do. So for instance, we could define this function tag in such a way that if you have a left-hand side that is a URI with one path entry, and the right-hand side that is a relative URI with just one additional path entry, then it's defined how these combine to what you actually want here, which is the /foo/bar item. Now, these function tags can be, or this function tag can be defined, but of course the problem is that the semantics are based on the URI syntax. And there are some weird cases. So, for instance, if your base, the query base is HT, and the query expands to TP : and so on. Yeah, you might have to put these together by string concatenation. So essentially, the actual semantics are completely married with the semantics of the URI syntax, and you essentially just have a more complex way of dealing with URI syntax. And the question is, for all these weird cases, is it always possible to express both the left-hand side and the right-hand side as CRIs and do this independently, so you don't have to understand the left-hand side to express the right-hand side? An alternative processing model, of course, would be that you only ever express a right-hand side if you know the left-hand side. So you couldn't independently translate the right-hand side of a query into the right-hand side of this CBOR Pact construct. Yeah, this leads to the observation that probably the easiest way to define the semantics of this function tag is to take the input CRIs and convert them back to URI-like things, concatenate the two strings, and then convert back to CRIs. Yeah, but what's the point of using CRIs if you have to do something like this? So this would be the most general solution. The most useful solution would be to operate semantically on the CRI and CRI reference, and to first find the spot in the left-hand side that would be extended next by the right-hand side. Yeah, there are examples where the right-hand side would think, for instance, that it is composed of paths, and in reality, these strings actually turn into something different. So for the first example in the top, in the bottom right corner, we would have the hash mark in the left-hand side, which means that anything that is written in the right-hand side is actually part of a fragment identifier. And this is not theoretical. A lot of people are using that structure. Or maybe a little bit more exotic case where we actually build the second part of the hostname from the right-hand side. I think this is a little bit not so sane, but it's an example that we could or could not try to address. And this is the space where we run into the question, should we maybe subsetting the curry concept? So is there a curry subset where all this does make sense? And to build a good such subset, we probably would need to develop a corpus of curries to look at and to derive a meaningful subset from those. So we take this corpus of curries, sort them into sane and insane, and try to include the sane ones, but not include the insane ones. And of course, when we do that, the next question is, what do we do if we encounter an actual curry that is outside the sane subset? So this all looks really ugly, but on the other hand, it looks ugly when you're trying to solve the whole problem. There are lots of sane curries out there, and this slide just has an example from SDF, which is not normally coded in CWAR, at least not at the current time, but which shows that it actually makes a lot of sense to use curries in a structural way, in a way that actually has a left-hand side and a right-hand side that are not cut up at an arbitrary boundary, but that actually has a semantic meaning to a certain extent. And that brings me to the last question. I think curry has been developed to solve a widely appreciated problem. Curry also has got stuck from in its current node state in W3C because everybody recognized the curries themselves are not the technically enticing way of solving the problem, but it's also the only one that we have at the moment. And the solution used by curries is lexical. And one thing we have learned in 40 years of standardization of text-based protocols is that lexical solutions always cause problems, that it's not possible to solve anything in a clean way by doing something at the lexical level. So it's a little bit like C preprocessor macros. Of course, these can do a lot of things, but it's in the end also very hard to manage what they are actually doing. And of course, program language designers try to get away from lexical solutions, and I think application format designers should too. So is there something that could be described as a structural form of queries, a structural better query that fits better to the CRI paradigm? And can we backport this to the URI space? So can we design it in such a way that it also makes sense in the URI space? And now for the real moonshot, can we do this in a way that it actually is a subset of lexical queries? So that would be my wish for a subset we come up with. So do we have to do this now? Probably not. The one thing we should we may want to achieve here is to have a rough understanding of what this could be and avoid doing something in CRIs that is stupid, that is getting in the way of getting a better query introduced. But given that these function tags in CBOPACT are infinitely powerful, maybe it's not really very likely that we will set ourselves up for such a roadblock. So maybe we can just spin this off as a separate project and say we are not going to address query in the base CRI spec in the href spec and leave this one for some bright grad students to figure out.
Yeah, I agree. This should be a separate piece of work, really. I wonder if in the href document you see already something that should be changed or removed to not create an obstacle for the future work, or if it's good to give some warning in that sense already.
Well, if I were seeing such a problem in the href spec, then I would probably try to change it to fix that.
Right.
I don't see a problem with that, given that the function tag approach is so powerful.
Okay, is it worth mentioning up front that for the time being this possible extension is out of scope, or just say nothing?
The ITU had this great phrase that we don't use, which was, "It is for further study."
That's a good one. Yes, that's a good one.
Escape edge. Nice. Plus one to Marco's comment on the scoping.
So that's a plan for the future then, to explore more.
When we explore this, and I agree that it shouldn't be in href and at earliest kind of we might need it in Coral, but we should have a close look at what we want to use it for, because to me queries are mostly a way of making things readable and editable, and we're working in binary object space, and there is kind of these are not things that you enter through a keyboard or read through a display. And by the time it enters a form where this becomes relevant, then that format could deal in queries again. There are two cases when I think, and maybe these overlap a bit, when I think it might be relevant, and that is when we deal with compressing CRIs where the prefix is known and the rest is not known. Because if we know if we are dealing with what I know from RDF to be the kind of regular ontologies, we don't have to compress the prefix. We might want to compress the prefix and kind of when expressing the dictionary, But for practical use, we can just enumerate all the terms in that dictionary and have reasonably short number. Problem would only be when there is an ontology or any namespace that grows faster than the dictionary is updated, and then we might need to have binary queries. But maybe allowing the dictionary to be updated faster is the more straightforward way to solve that.
Well, one interesting observation with people actually using queries is that, and prefixes in general, also in Yang and other places, is that they seem to think those prefixes are semantic. So that the prefixes mean something to the people looking at the example on the whiteboard. And that's, of course, a really big problem on one hand, but it also can be a rather useful little expedient mechanism in an implementation. So that's maybe one aspect we also should consider.
But isn't that kind of would the prefix be helpful in the implementation? I mean, the implementation can still split things up as it likes, but this is about the serialization more, I think.
Yeah, but if a big implementation works best when you offer the URI in a particular query form, then everybody will do that, and suddenly the prefix becomes semantic. So maybe that's just a form of subification, but it's something that I have seen. So people really believe these prefixes mean something.
But isn't that more reason to not do them on a binary level?
Probably.
But, Christian, were you suggesting to start getting a bit more into this already while working on Coral?
There are a few examples around where it would be a bit tricky to phrase a compact Coral without having some solution here. In particular, when you express units by referencing into the URI form of the registered value, then all of a sudden you either have to enumerate all the values in the registry, or you just have to split it by prefix, or you take the cost of spelling out the full name of the registry every time you mention a unit. So that is the one single practical use case in Coral that I'm aware of where that would bring me to tackle this in Coral. Although as I said, I hope that a good setup of the unpacking dictionaries is the better way to do this.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we won't get get away without doing a bit of that corpus work first and see how are people using that, and is that something that we want to support, and if yes, how do we express this in CBOR packed? But we can always define the function tag in the right way, and that would be something that we now push into Coral. Great.
Thanks. Great discussion. Any more comments or questions for Karsten? Anyone? Don't see anything in the chat either. So then I think we are at the end of the agenda. And as AUB, I just wanted to mention you should have seen the request for a 2-hour session at IETF 113, so we'll meet there. And I plan to be in person in Philadelphia for those who also travel.
Yeah, I plan not to be there in person. I have another AOB item, RFC 9193. It's finally published. It was stuck in the RFC editor queue for half a year because it was waiting for the new version of the HTTP semantics RFC 9110. And that in turn was waiting for the last document out of the HTTP of the current HTTP cluster to be done, which was RFC 9114. And it may interested you that this was one of the stuck items on that was the generation of index entries for that document out of the information that the cram-down source provides. So I actually had a little bit of a hand in that at the end to make it possible to do this. Anyway, so this thing is there, and it means we now have defined terms for things like media types and content types, content formats, and we also have defined ABNF for that. So we never should again be in the situation that we have to do all this again and again and again for each new document that does something. This is a standard strict document, so we can reference into that, in particular into the ABNF, and save a lot of time.
I will expect to see a lot of references to this document, especially on the terminology.
Great.
Christian, you were shortly in the queue, or at the mic anyway.
No, just saying thank you for doing this.
And thank you all for the support in doing this.
Carsten, what was the exact problem? I couldn't grasp it.
What was
the problem that was blocking the HTTP RFC? Generation of what?
Of the index. You can have indexes in RFCs, and that has been a long time feature, and there has been RFC XML support for that for a while. But of course, a traditional index uses page numbers, and we do not have pages in RFCs anymore. So those page numbers had to be replaced by links.
Okay.
And these links are much harder to actually aggregate. So if you have 5 references on a page, you collapse that into a single page number. Okay. But now you have to actually give the section numbers, paragraph numbers for each of these references and so on.
Right.
So you get a lot of noise. Mm-hmm. And then it actually hurts that the current XML to RFC implementation didn't have support for primary index entries. So the ones where the term is actually defined. This should look different. And I actually implemented that in XML to RFC. And now, if you look at 9114, you can see what I mean. But look at the HTML version, because the text version is a bit weird.
So what is that automatic? So how can you enable that? So say I'm writing a markdown thing. What should I do to get that?
Yeah, I probably should come up with a little tutorial for that. So
okay.
You have to decide whether you want to do the markup manually, which is easy but tedious, or do it automatically, which cram-down RFC supports. But then you have to be a lot more on the outlook for weird things going on.
Okay. But is there any specific option that I need to enable in order to get this, or is it out of the box?
Actually, yes. But again, this requires a longer tutorial to make it work. So
Right. Okay. Next time.
let's take
But
this
thank you for
offline,
the
and
heads up.
probably I will write something in the wiki,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
wiki at
yeah, that would be
rc.space for that.
super. Okay, fantastic.
Another AOB is that I'm happy to see the seaboard.me is up and running again. It was out for, I don't know, maybe not 24 hours, but
25.
kind of, and how many?
25.
25. Oh, yeah, I realize how much I at least depend on it. And I wasn't the only one, but I speak for myself.
Yeah, we had a weird problem with a file server, and somebody rebooted the system on which this runs, and yeah, I had to manually fix things again. But unfortunately, the system that alerts me to that has so many false positives that I didn't see the actual alert because it was buried in false positives. So
Until people started to write you.
Jöran Selander finally alerted me to this, and
Right.
So I got it fixed.
Thank you.
But you all know that you can install the CBORDIAC command line tools and do it from there. I know it's
yes, but it's not the same thing.
It's much more convenient to do it in the web page, but
Yeah.
in a pinch you can use the command line tools.
Right. Okay. Any more points to raise or discuss today? No, I think that was a very good meeting, actually. So talk to you latest in 2 weeks. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Talk to you then.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.